Okay, it's a great pleasure to be here, and I must thank the organizers for their kind invitation, and particularly my friends at Aquas, who often invite me to Barcelona, which is a great excuse to be back home from time to time. And in principle, one could think that the question they posed to me for my presentation was quite easy, and it has almost been already answered. Why social impact matters in our society? It's probably answering to this question, excuse me, is one of the few questions for which we would have consensus, because I think there is a general consensus that science is very important. And we have already seen cites quotations from important people. Here is one of my quotations from important people from the beginning of the past century, which kind of summarizes quite briefly the issues that in a way justify why we are here. I shall devote only a few lines, because only a few lines are necessary to explain this. It's quite easy, isn't it, to the expression of my belief in the importance of science. It is by this daily striving after knowledge that man has raised. It's the beginning of the last century, so the language is a bit gendered, right? But anyway, that man has raised himself to the unique position he occupies on Earth, and that his power and well-being have continually increased. So it is sounds a bit, beginning of last century, all these notions about the power of man over nature nowadays could be a bit more nuanced, but in the end, the reason is here, this understanding that our well-being in today's society can be traced back to the contributions that science has made to knowledge. And that if there was a reason why innovation moved from being a concept that denoted something to be avoided in the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, innovation was something bad because it was rocking the boat, was creating instability. Now innovation is something good that projects us further. Why is this change? The change is in great part due to the effect of the scientific revolution, and the fact that the scientific revolution has given us this notion that advance, progress, change is important. So science is important for society. Of course it is. And the impact of science is crucial for society. Of course it is. So where is the problem? Because if there wasn't a problem, we wouldn't be here, would we? So I've picked up a citation from Marie Curie, because Marie Curie has another quote which is much better known than this one, and it's often used in the debates we have, which is this one, which doesn't seems to be going in a different direction. We must not forget that when radium was discovered, no one knew that it could prove useful in the hospitals, right? The work was one of pure science. There is something that is pure. Science can be pure. The work, and this is a proof. Just careful here, because this is a scientist saying that the case of radium is giving proof that scientific work must not be considered from the point of view of the direct usefulness of it. These are strong words, and this is why this citation pops up a lot in our debates about impact, right? It must be done for itself. So science is not done for the application. As we are saying now, it has to be done by itself for the beauty. It's the beauty for science. It has a value in itself, right? And then there is always a chance that scientific discovery may become like radium, a benefit for humanity. So we do science because of its beauty, and then there is always a chance that things may happen, and that the things that may happen may be good. So it's relevant because I see this quotation quite a bit. One could think that was interesting then what happened with radium, right? Because it turns out that, in fact, it was not to be that useful in hospitals at all, that it was the most radioactive natural ingredient in nature. It was, in fact, explored for its use in atomic weapons, nuclear weapons, and in the end, its main use was in painting fluorescent dials in watches, and that didn't last too long because the poor people that were painting the watches were falling dead with mouth cancer, a cancer of the mouth, and the whole thing was, in a way, forgotten. I've read somewhere that the world production of radium nowadays in the world is 100 grams per year. So people would say, well, yeah, further evidence, right? Further evidence that we cannot really predict the way that scientific results will lead to these applications that we want to have, that we would like to have. But I think here the more important issue about the context of this quote was that at that time, the reason why Marie Curie says that radium is important and so on and so forth is because a laboratory was being established to study, in fact, the application of radium in hospitals, and Marie Curie was involved in it. So the issue here is not that Marie Curie is not interested in application. And in fact, in the previous citations, it said, science is important for society. What I think underlines this view is that in her opinion, an opinion that's still nowadays very, very dominant, you have a very clear differentiation. You have a differentiation between what is basic science and what's applied science and technological development. Those are two very separate things. And then what happens is that you have things that pop up from basic science that can be used in technological development and have applications. And we don't know really what are the things that are going to be popped up. We just hope that they're going to be good. But the point here is that there is a clear distinction between basic research and applied work. And my presentation basically today will be that more important than the discussion about why is science important is how it is important. Because if we start thinking about the processes, and we've seen a lot of the RIACAT work is about processes, if we start thinking about processes, we will realize that these processes are very complex. And because they are very complex, this issue of this separation, this clear separation between basic science and applied science falls apart. How so? So it is not just an issue that the results, the clear results of basic research are then applied to applications. The relationship between research and application is very complex. And there's a lot of research showing this. And in fact, it's one of the issues that I think will be at also the basis of the questions that this seminar, these 4 days, 3 days of work will explore, is that there are many, many, many different ways in which scientific contributions are made to society. And this is a citation from a study of 12 years ago. Pui Tang is here among us today. The normal way in which the approach of Marie Curie would consider this would be a focus on point 1. So science provides, research provides useful knowledge, a stock of useful knowledge. And then from this stock, you may pick. But more of this, it also provides social knowledge, which basically social knowledge is the idea of simple ideas that have a societal impact, that societies incorporate as their own. I don't know, I have a little watch here of these fashionable things of Fitbit that tells me that it would be nice if I walked to 10,000 steps a day. This is a noble simplification of some research that may have shown that being active is important. So the 10,000 steps a day has become a kind of social knowledge. It's being accepted. Many people will criticize it, but it's being accepted as almost a social norm that we share, that is important, we walk 10,000 steps. It's a different kind of the stock of useful knowledge that is generated by science, because that is much more nuanced, it's much more precise, it's of different nature. And then you have other mechanisms. Sometimes scientists will find things that can be of interest, might not necessarily be specific pieces of patentable knowledge, maybe other things, create firms to develop them further. As the creation of firms themselves provide a channel and provide a stimulus to the economy and has in themselves potential possible benefits. Very important. You may do research, not find anything, but still graduates, researchers will be trained, will increase their skills. It's the skilling of graduates and researchers that are also a channel by which research, and therefore scientific research, produce outputs, outcomes, impacts that are valuable to society. Instruments, this is very well known. A lot of, for instance, of the arguments of why CERN is providing so much that is beneficial to society. It's not so much about the outcomes of the research, but it's about the progression, the progress it has made on instrumentation, huge magnets, whatever. So instrumentation is very, very relevant. Development network and social interactions. The notion I was mentioned of productive interactions in the previous. Sorry?
Sorry, technical aspects.
Oh. Oh, sorry. I don't hear. Yep. Perfect. I was in blissful ignorance of the problems I was creating for all of you. If you don't hear me well, just put hands. If you don't understand something, yes. Where was I? Development of networks and the stimulation of social interactions. So these social interactions that are of concern to the Dutch system are in themselves important. And they are generated through research activities. So that's also a way, a channel. So it's an enhancement of problem-solving capacity. Overall, although sometimes it's very difficult to pin down specifically how this happens, when we do research, scientific research activity, our capacities to solve problems increase. So it is not an issue of I have an output and then, things may happen that are of interest by the exploitation of this output. The relationship between scientific activity, research, and impact and its application is complex. So that's already one reason why thinking about impact can be problematic, because of these varieties of channels of application, if you want. There is other things. One is that, in fact, the alignment between the research priorities and the innovation and the societal needs is not a given. It may happen that you are researching things that may not be the ones that are more relevant for the societal problems we face. And this happens because innovation and research have what they call directionalities, have a specific direction. Even if we have a high degree of uncertainty about what could be the results of our research activity today, I think you can still say that it's not the same to research nuclear issues, on radium. It's different than researching on social relationships in agrarian contexts. And if you push funds in a certain direction, you create some capabilities that build up on that direction. The technologies that are associated with nuclear are have specific characteristics. They tend to be very large. They draw you to very huge technological structures. Nuclear power is related to nuclear weapons. It has a direction which is different from research that you may be doing in other fields. And not all directions are equal. And I'll come back to this issue afterwards. It's not indifferent. So the issue that say, well, things may happen, it is unsatisfactory, because the things that may happen when you do scientific research may not necessarily be the things that you want them to happen. So, and because we know, or we have some idea of where we are going, the very adept citation of Alice in Wonderland, we have our trajectories in our mind, we have certain idea of where we want to go, then it makes sense of thinking of the alignment of scientific activities with these goals we have. And finally, and this has been a part of canonical, if you want, research in science and innovation of late, we should not expect that because you invest in science, you have investments in research, you should not expect that automatically you will have these returns to society. And in fact, the concepts of innovation systems tells you this, tells you that to achieve innovation, you not only do you need actors that are capable of doing the work they have to do. It's not a sufficient condition to have a very strong research system, publishing a lot and being of high quality. You need to have a linkage with the application, a linkage with society. Linkages are very important. So the notion of system underlines the importance of linkages among actors in a society. Therefore, when we think about impact, it is not in the lines, so say, of a molecular thing just may happen. We have to work on these linkages, and in part, a lot of the previous presentation stresses this as a policy challenge. So that, in a way, it is why it's important. And this has led to a series of policy changes, proposals, and activities all over the world. Many have been mentioned also in the previous presentation. There's this thing called the impact agenda that some people think is great and other people think it's a terrible thing which should be avoided. But impact agenda, very, very, very important. And usually it is traced back to this document. You will see that my citations are a bit old. It's probably show my age, but anything is more than 10 years old here. This one is about 25 years old. The document, Realizing Our Potential, that comes out of a conservative government in the UK, and that's one of the elements that pushes forward the aspects of impact within instruments like the research assessment exercise that then became the research excellence framework. And here, basically, one of the messages is that the research should more directly contribute to economic growth. Yeah, it's a conservative government, the views on jobs and growth. Be planned for end users. So it's the issue that in the definition of your priorities, you have to take into consideration the end use, more or less along the lines of what I've been arguing. And that's incumbent on the providers of knowledge to return benefits to the public. And this is already an important change. So the scientist, in a way, cannot be in this only because of the beauty of science, says the UK government. It is incumbent on the provider of knowledge to be relevant to society. And this notion will keep popping up in all the sets of policy recommendations, documents that today have become commonplace. And I think one of the areas where you see this idea more clearly expressed is in a document which politically you can say it's very, very different from Realizing Our Potential. It comes from a different set of cosmological vision, if you want, which is the notions and the discussions around responsible research and innovation, which are very different of thinking of research for economic growth. It's really research for societal benefit. The Rome Declaration happens in the presidency, in the Italian presidency, sponsored by the European Commission, although it's not a declaration from the Council, but anyway, has this paragraph, which I think is relevant. Responsible research and innovation requires that all stakeholders, scientists are stakeholders, users are stakeholders, technological developers are stakeholders, including civil society, are responsive to each other. So it's a question of communication that also in the previous presentation came up. But this is put as a basis, the foundation of what makes research responsible. Careful here. So this shared responsibility for the processes and the outcomes of research and innovation. And I think this is important. So we cannot just stand back and think things may happen. If you do that, according to the people that wrote this declaration, you are being irresponsible in a way, right? Because you have to take, as scientists and as society all together, we have to take shared responsibility for the outcomes of the results of our research. If you are working on nuclear and an atomic bomb comes out of the end, this is shared responsibility here that you have to assume. And that is a key element of the notion of responsible research and innovation. Working together. How do we achieve that? By this notion of collaboration, that you do not extract the work of the scientist from the rest of society, but you push society, researchers, other communities to work together. In the definition of the research agenda, so it's not science for its beauty. The definition of the research agenda, to an extent, comes also influenced by those societal needs. What else do I have here? The conduct of research, the access to research, and the application of new knowledge in society. So at the core of the definition of responsible research of innovation, there is this notion that the definition of research priorities and the application of research results are all part of a same process that has to be done in a collaborative manner. And this is, in a way, an important issue. That's why I said at the beginning that the question and the debate was not about why research impact was important. It was about how it was important. Because through these documents, we are starting to find policy proposals that tell us that we have to do things in a different way. It's a matter of the how. What happens? That through this, in fact, research policy is slowly changing. And you have increasingly more instruments that are putting the emphasis on these issues of application and of final goals. The SDG slide that we saw previously with the SDG goals is becoming very common nowadays in presentations in science policy. That means that we are orienting our research efforts to societal purposes. And this is being done increasingly so in policy environments and policy circles. There are new instruments. And so all the questions about challenges, societal challenges, mission orientation, which are today the core of the political and the policy debate, come from this perspective, right? And this is an important issue again, because in a lot of these arguments, collaboration comes as a key element. When you have the notions of societal challenges, when you define policies in this way, collaboration becomes an important element, a key. And the notion of the knowledge generation and how knowledge generation relates to application changes. And it is no longer the view that I do some research, I get some results, then I pass them to you. It's a question that we are all together involved in processes that generate knowledge, that you apply, and that they generate that knowledge and this application goes towards the fulfillment of societal objective. It's a slightly different way of looking at things. I will come back to this metaphor of the relay race, because I think, again, it's relevant and it's really very much imbued in the way we still think about the relationship between science and society. So these are the core of the debates on mission orientation. And if I include a reference to this, because this now is in fashion. Now, because the European Commission has taken, the commissioners saw a report by an economist, which probably many of you are very familiar, Mariana Mazzucato, wrote a report on mission orientation, and the commissioner took some fancy to it and asked her to do another report, and all of a sudden now mission orientation seems to be at the core of the debates of the shape of the future framework program, FP9, or how is it going to be called, Horizon Europe. So now, in the first Mazzucato report on mission orientation, there is this table that she extracts and changes a bit from a previous article from Soeti Arundel, 1993 to 25 years old, like that. And they make this distinction about the old way of looking at missions and the new way of looking at missions, which is, of course, the way that Mariana Mazzucato in that first report was looking at it, and what she was being proposed would have to be a way of orienting the new design of science and innovation policies. Science and innovation kind of all together, science and innovation. And here there are certain things that are relevant. In the old visions of mission, and you usually hear the references to the moonshot. We're going to go to the moon, this is our objective, this is our mission, and this is what it is. It's a very clear technical challenge which has a binary result. You either go or don't go, so in a way it's easy to assess whether you've been successful or not. It's top-down, it's technological, and the expectation is that through this mission you will generate capabilities and technologies that go beyond the specific goal for which you have designed it. So you go to the moon, you have Teflon. I'm caricaturizing a bit, but it's the notion of spillovers, spin-offs, things that pop up from this technological challenge. New challenges are different in the sense that the challenge is not only or mainly technological. The challenge is social, societal. It's a change in economy and society that we think it is important. And in that setting and working towards addressing the challenge, we have the participation of a large variety of factors. And in this new definition of missions, this notion of collaboration, of participation of society in itself, society at large, has a lot of relevance. Quite a bit of ink is spent in saying this is a bottom-up process. How we're going to articulate the bottom-up process, that's implementation, and it's not quite addressed in the report, and this is where really the mess is. But the point of view of our objective and how you define your policy orientation is through the notion that you cannot have a central direction, that the process of definition of research priorities and conduct of research have to be done in a kind of participatory way, and step by step. It's incremental. What you generate through this is a joint societal effort which is trans and cross-disciplinary, that brings many types of communities together, working towards a societal goal, and to do this work, you require scientific research. This is the notion of mission in the way of new missions, in the way they were originally defined in this document. Then in the second document for the Commission, there are some interesting departures from this, but I'm not going to go into this. So, I don't know how I do for time. I'm very bad at timing myself, but if I get too long, you just say this. 10, 15, then I'm quite all right. I think so you have this shift. The notion of new missions is systemic. What it aims to is to change that system of innovation, because it aims to change relationships among the different actors that participate in research and generation of knowledge and its application. And it is oriented to societal challenges. And therefore, because it's systemic, it changes the way we think about the problem of knowledge generation and application. And here I go back to what I said before, the notion of a relay race, and what underpins Curie's citation by which I started this presentation, which is linear. I do research, I get results, I pass them. Then whoever comes next in the line does applied research, get results, pass them. Whoever comes next in the line uses the results to do technological development, pass them. Next in the line commercializes. So it's this notion that the generation and application of research is like a relay race. And the problem in this relay, and this is imbued in our language. We talk about technology transfer. We transfer from one step to another. We talk about notions like valley of death, which is this question that when we pass the baton from one to another, the baton may fall. So it's in the gaps in this linearity that the problems for technology and knowledge transfer occur. So this is a view that is really very much through the concepts we are using, imbued in the way we think about the problems of generation and application. And what this line of thinking and of policy nowadays is pushing towards is something very different. In responsible research and innovation, the notion is one of a collaborative endeavor. This is not a relay race. This is a football match in which different people have different skills, but they work together towards a goal. And therefore, it's not long. The issue is no longer whether science pushes or the man pulls or the value of death. The issue is about research, responsible research, anticipation, how we do articulate this participatory governance, which we think is good, but we don't have any idea how we're going to do that. The notion of co-creation that's imbued already in the current Horizon 2020, but again, its application is a bit fishy in the way it has been done. The notion of open science, by the way. So open science is also about this. The discourse is very coherent. And so, but one of the reasons why we are having problems in the application of this discourse is because we still keep these different notions of what it is that we are about. The notion of impact, the impact agenda, has very different ways in which we can interpret it. And in fact, we could interpret it, for instance, as an old mission or as a new mission. And that makes a lot of difference. And sometimes the reasons why we don't understand each other when we talk is because we use the same concept, say impact, and we see it in very different ways. We may see it as a relay race, or we may see it with a model of collaboration. And when you do that, then you don't understand each other, because we are using the same word and we are meaning different things. And that's what happened to us, and that's how I'm going to finish. When in Science Europe, we had the idea, which I must say and confess to you, which I regretted for a long time. We had the idea of generating a position statement of what impact meant for the organizations that were part of Research Europe. Stan was part of the work group, and we can tell you nice anecdotes of how sweaty and difficult this process was. And it was interesting because a lot of the discussions we had were about the concepts. The concepts matter a lot because it really circumscribes what you are thinking about and orients you in a way of thinking. You know, how you understand impact, new models of mission orientation, all models of mission orientation pushes you in different directions of how you see this relationship between science generation and application. And the problem in a way is that the notion of impact suggests things that many of us working in impact say are the things which should not be suggested. It's always this question when we start talking about impact, we say, it's impact, but we really don't mean impact, right? We mean something else, we mean collaboration. It's impact because the notion of impact is really also one of these concepts that suggests this linear view. You do something, impacts on another, the other moves. So it's one after another. So it's direct. It's rather unidirectional. And sometimes because the impact, you can see it, you can say, well, impact is those things that you can observe clearly as being impacted, right? If you cannot observe it, then probably there is no impact because this is it. And the issue is that this notion, if it suggests this, it may drive us in directions that are not the ones we want to be driven. And a lot of the debate within the working group was in this moving from the notion of impact to the notion of contribution, which is very common in impact assessment, that we will see these days in the presentations, I am sure, that is based in the ideas I have mentioned at the beginning, that those impacts or these effects of science and society occur in many, many different ways, that there are many different paths that link knowledge generation and application, and that they are seldom unidirectional. You know, technology affects science. Technology affects science in the way science is conducted. It's also the notion that it is not only my priorities as scientists that affect what I do, but it can be also the requirements of society. You have a dialogue, and the dialogue goes both ways. You have feedback mechanisms. So it is not the thing that you do one thing and then the other one moves. It's a question of interaction, which is crucial in our understanding of how science, how knowledge generation and application relate to each other. And when you do that, this requires the contribution of many different actors. These take time. Much research is foundational. Much research could be about concepts. Much research is incremental, few steps. That's very important research. You do a step at a time. A lot of research should be, maybe more than now, replicating experiments, double-checking. This is also research. This kind of research, what impact does it have in itself? Well, not much, because if it's foundational, you need much more. If it's incremental, it's just a small thing, yet it's very important. This notion that there are aspects of research that are crucial when you think of the application of research results, but in themselves do not provide this kind of a step change that then you can identify as the basis of a future impact, and yet are very important, is crucial to our understanding of how we see impact, which is not quite impact, right? And how we assess, above all, how we assess this impact. So we think of this as a process in which you have to identify how actors work together and contribute differently to the achievement of the goals we have set up for our research policy. So it's a movement from impact to contribution, which then means that the way we observe these contributions have to be different. Impact indicators, narrowly defined, are seldom adequate, because it's not, this is not about the interactions, those interactions that are crucial, the role of small increments. How do you capture this with the traditional so-called impact indicators? Difficult. Often, that's not what they portray. And the focus on collaboration, on processes, on interactions, that again will be part of this seminar. The second one was about notions, and in that we had a lot of discussions. And here's our journey number 2, from impact to value. And the notion that it is really, if we are orienting research into some directions, we cannot shy away of discussing about the values of what we want to achieve. When we are in the fork and say we're going to go in that direction, that choice is a normative choice that carries values, and these values have to be part of how we think about research impact. And we cannot say our science of impact goes one way, but I don't care about values. No, because the values define what I value when I do the evaluation. In one place once we wrote, putting the value back in evaluation. The word is there, but we forget that evaluation is about values, right? So value judgments are necessary, and we have to consider them in our discussion and in our analysis of contribution of research to development goals, to policy goals. I will cut a bit because I might be a bit late. That leads to another definition. We saw the definition of impact from Hefke. That's the definition of value, which, if you take them side by side, yeah, not that different, right? But this is the definition of value that comes in the positional statement of Science Europe. Value will be deemed to accrue when research has a direct or indirect influence. And here the words are all measured. It's about influence. It's not about an impact that has really, it's not necessarily causational. It has had an influence, doesn't mean it has cost. And this interest on top of it can be indirect, on the generation of effects that are valued by society, including the pluralism contributed by academic freedom. And that's a kind of debate, of course, of the extent to which some of the values that are present in scientific activity are in themselves societal values in the sense that are appreciated by societies. Pluralism, as embodied in scientific activity, can in itself be something we can aim to. So this kind of discussion again, up to what extent the beauty of science is a value in itself or not. And this pops up nicely in the definition. Definitions matter. And you have to be read carefully because lots of hours have been spent fighting about the words. It is and any other definition you will find in the reports. So value depends on what whole societies or segments hold as important, based on their needs and preference at a specific point in time. Very good. What does this mean for evaluation? Well, what this means for evaluation is contestable. It will always be contestable. It's contestable because values are contestable. And because values have to be part of our evaluation, because we are discussing about where you're going to go and we have disagreements, the way we do evaluation has in its own way, needs to be contestable. And we don't have to shy away from this. We have to go towards an evaluation philosophy that considers, accepts, embraces debate in the whole and the same process of evaluation. If you think that the values that you are trying to achieve may be contestable. So we have different understandings of what is valuable, and also not everything that is valuable is directly observable. So indicators and data are very important. Of course they are. But we cannot be guided in our analysis of contributions and impact only by the availability of indicators. There may be situations in which we may not have indicators for that, and still, those may be important things we want to achieve. Personally, and that's a personal opinion, I am a critic of data-driven. The concept of data-driven analysis gives me the jibbies, right? Because it's this problem that when you are data-driven, you will analyze where the data is, right? But it could be, and probably is, that maybe those things that are important, there is no data. So then, data in the sense of quantitative measurable data. Data in the sense I, again, get some empirical evidence by doing a case study. That's the kind of data which is very different, that some cases will be necessary. That has importance in the way the methodologies are applied. Also, when you use evaluation of impact as a way of assessing research, you've got to be careful. Because, of course, the impacts often are unintended, do not depend only on the researchers. The notion of contribution, different communities coming together, could also lead to bad impacts. Right? The values, we can have very interesting debates about the mathematical algorithms that have led to encryption, to very powerful encryption algorithms, are good or bad. Yeah, some people would say, if you get terrorist groups using very hard encryption mechanisms, that compounds problems of security. Yeah, so they have debates on this. We have to be open to those. And therefore, you have to handle the results of impact assessment with a lot of care. It cannot be the only determinant through which you distribute resources. And that's always a temptation, right? I do my assessment, I get this impact, these guys have been gotten impact, the money for them. And this is something we need to avoid. We have to consider, we have to say impact in the way we understand it is very important. That doesn't mean that the allocation of resources have to be determined by a narrow view of the results you have achieved in terms of impact. And finally, and that kind of was also in the scoping, in the position of a statement of Science Europe, everything I said leads you to a conclusion that in your methodological approach to impact assessment, you have to have diversity. You have to have diversity of methods and techniques. And I guess this will be reflected in the 3 days, it's 3 or 4 days of workshop you're going to have. It's going to be a lot of different approaches and techniques to impact assessment, and that diversity that you will see in the course is a diversity that you have to cherish and protect. Very important to protect this diversity, because sometimes the pressure in terms of policy and politics leads to the selection of very specific techniques that seem more powerful to the separation and the detriment of the others. Don't do that. Be eclectic in your evaluation methodologies. And that's all. I have been already having looks that my time is over. Thanks.
5 minutes of questions.
Okay. 5 minutes of questions for Jordi Molas-Gallart.
No questions, no debate, yes. There's a mic here. Lo que no sé si funciona.
Thanks, wonderful talk. You said many, many interesting things, and actually quite inspiring things. There's one of the later things you said about data. It is true. I mean, technology and data often confound us. And we believe that what we see is everything that there is, and perhaps the most important stuff that there is. We behave a bit like the drunkard in the joke that is looking for his keys, not where he lost them, but actually where there's light in the street, right? Now, the question is, should we make an effort, once we have become aware of this, for getting data? That myself, I tend to think that but that's pure intuition, that most of the problems with very exact data compilations, huge equations, can be solved by extensive peer review. But that's a bit unsatisfactory as well, because one cannot stop there. One should try to quantify this kind of other assessments. So I wonder, what's your view on that, and what are the efforts out there to get this data that is needed?
Yeah. My view on this is that it's worth making continuing efforts at improving our data and do what we could think sophisticated data analysis. One of the reasons why you should do this is because the kind of insights you get from this sort of, I wouldn't call it big data because I heard the term, but this is very substantial efforts at large data sets, is that what you get through this, you cannot get through what I like to do, which is case studies, right? I like the case study. I like to go, talk with people, see how things have happened. The data tends to black box, that something has happened, you are not very sure why it has happened. But the accumulation of case studies, at some point you reach what people in qualitative analysis say, degree of saturation. You are not learning much more. And then it's like what happens with the REF case studies that have been presented. We have 7,000 of them. You get all kinds of things. Now we know it's diverse, it's complex. How do you extract patterns that can be of interest out of these case studies? So often with quantitative analysis. And some of the studies that are being done here, that for instance Ismail Rafols has done, which is quantitative analysis with big data sets, provide very interesting insights. So yes, by all means, but keep the quality, the methodological diversity. And then there is a point, and that goes straight to your question of the balance between the peer review and the data, which is the classical statement of the Leiden Manifesto. It says data should not be there to determine decisions. It's not the substitute for a decision process. It's an element to inform peer review. And in our present situation, as unsatisfactory this may be, in some contexts which impartial peer review may be very difficult to implement because of political reasons and the dynamics of the communities, still to base decisions only on formulas, on data, formula-led distribution is something that me personally, I won't be completely against. So my personal, and that's a personal feeling more than anything else, right? But my personal position is the one that is expressed in the Leiden Manifesto. Data is an important element to reach decisions, but those decisions at the end have to be taken by collaboration, by groups, by communities. Also, it will be very difficult to mix an approach that seeks data-driven allocation of resources with the notions of participation and of contribution and of collaboration that underpin responsible research and innovation, new missions, that all these policy concepts are based on processes that do not match well with ideas of distribution of resources based on formulas. So, I'm very opinionated on this matter.
But you also have it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. This one there.
Hi. Thank you for the nice presentation. I really enjoyed it. It took a little of head scratching when you got really philosophical. And the idea that I got from your presentation is that before moving forward, we have to take a step backward and think and ask ourselves what is important to society. Then when we have that answers that changes with time, which adds more complexity to this problem, to this big issue, then we should take the left road or the right road. But we need to know what is really important to society right now, which is different what it was important I don't know, 10 years ago, or will be important in 10 years in the future. So I don't know if this is the idea I got. Thank you.
Yes, but with a but here. Yes, I do think that in debates about impact assessment and evaluation, we have to think about what's important. It is not that easy in terms of application in our day-to-day, because we are not now in a crossroad and now we are making decisions and then we do. No, we are doing research right now, and we are doing investment. So we move. There's a famous quote about policy that says, policy is defined as being implemented, and it's implemented as being defined. The process of policy is not linear either. Science is not linear, policy is not linear either. In reality, you don't define policies, then implement them, and then you evaluate. But it's a big mess. And this is also 1950s that was written by the policy, big names in the US in 56, by branch. What was the concept? I've forgotten now the concept in the modeling through. That policy is conducted in a process in which you just model through, you little by little. And sometimes you do evaluation and you didn't know impact, and up to a lot of extent, a lot of what you do nowadays in your research allocations have to be influenced by what your capacities are and by what your current distributions are. You just cannot say it doesn't matter where I am now. Where I am now matters a lot. So it's not that I'm standing here and say I'm going to take this road, I go this one, and then I start as if it was all tabula rasa and there was nothing. No, when I make decisions, I'm influenced by my context. So I think we have to be a bit careful of saying, if I portray the idea that before doing anything, we have to step back, think, and not doing anything, no, that's not what I try to say. That to say is that we have to have considerations of value, but you have to be conscious that the process in which you are applying policy is where we are. And I cannot say all of a sudden, well, I had this beautiful idea that maybe the research we should do should be in an area in which we have no capacities whatsoever. No.
There is also this, I would say, confounded factor that what we see right now is, things keep going happening. So there's a delay between the things we do now and the things we see in the future.
Exactly. That's why in policy you model through, because you are really constrained by what you see right now and by what you have right now. But what I'm trying to propose is a way of modeling through, right? And this way of modeling through requires, from our perspective, I think, because I think it's an issue with the community of impact assessment, changes on some of the processes by which you allocate research. That doesn't mean that these changes will have necessarily revolutionary, in the sense that will produce a complete upheaval of the system. Probably they won't. It's a progressive incremental change from my perspective. This one, this one there at the end, and here at the front, okay.
Hello. Just to thank you, the time you have been speaking about basic research and the importance that when we are doing basic research at this moment, perhaps you don't know if impacts will be in the society. And another thing, at this moment, I have 4 words for basic research. The new one that you told today, because I didn't know, that is basic research, pure research, you told about pure research. We have frontier research, we have blue sky research. All them are the same for you? Now, this is a very difficult question, and I leave them for those that do social studies of science. I very much think that they are not the same. But often, for instance, the concept of basic research
it's now very common to kind of criticize it, in the sense that there will be people that will come and give a speech and they'll say, I get angry when I see people that make this distinction between basic and applied, because nowadays you cannot really make these distinctions. Well, I'm easy. I wouldn't like to talk of pure, but that's kind of my personal, say, belief and ethical bias. I don't believe in science being pure because it's never been pure in the sense of being isolated of its context and being a value in itself. It's being funded by somebody, and often it's being funded with very specific long-term objectives. For me, the big difference in what some people refer to as basic and applied is in what is the driver of the specific research question you are addressing. The driver of the specific research question you are addressing may be theoretical, maybe the same at increasing knowledge per se, right? Or maybe an applied problem. And that's the core driver, the main driver of the specific research question. My belief is when it's theoretical, then we are moving towards the realm of fundamental, basic research, which for me are synonyms, although probably I will be hit in the head very hard by a proper philosopher of science and will say, I don't know what I'm talking about, and they will be right. I don't know what I'm talking about this. But for me, it's part of the same. And when you have a applied orientation, your research questions are applied, are moved by a specific applied problem. Then what you do might not be that different. When you do academic research in an academic environment, although your driver may be applied, your criteria of success are very similar to the ones in basic. It's empirical, it's the empirical it has to be empirically founded, it has to be open to debate, it has to be, notions have to be falsifiable, you may be wrong in what you're saying, and if you're proven wrong, you have to accept it. The canonical rules of science, in a way, I think, still work, understood in a broad sense, whether your question is driven by theory, whether your question is driven by application, the canonical rules are still the same. And that's probably why some people get very angry by the same use of the notions basic and applied, because they will say at the end, science is science. For the kind of concepts we are discussing today, this differentiation of what drives your research is a very important question. And I think this is really at the core of the debates we have to have. This is how do you set the research agenda? And here is where you have the concept. Because a lot of what you have talked, what is telling you is that you have to be explicit in that research agenda is not set for the beauty of science in itself, it's set by the societal problems we may be facing. And I would fall in this way. I will fall in this group. The questions may be basic and fundamental, but those basic and fundamental questions, foundational research, may be driven at the end, have to be driven at the end, because there is a societal problem you want to address and you think that knowledge will help you in that direction. Otherwise, it's very difficult to justify billions of public money that has to compete with other public sector applications. There is, you know, this concept, this label in these discussions, an argument which L'Oreal is called, the L'Oreal argument of research justification, because I'm worth it. So I am very much the L'Oreal argument for research investment. But many people in science are definitely for L'Oreal argument. Careful here, huh? Because I've heard in debates, just give us the money because we are worth it, we are very good. So my orientation, obviously, is impact is important. But that doesn't mean that research is not basic. It could be basic, but it's oriented. Basic oriented, another concept that you have around.